This is Platemark. My name is Ann Shafer, and I am your host. Platemark is a podcast about prints and the printmaking ecosystem. We're talking about fine art prints, usually limited editions, etchings and lithographs, screen prints and relief prints. In this 5-part mini-series, I'm talking to 5 artists who were selected to be included in an exhibition called 5x5 that was part of PrintAustin's Winter Festival this year in 2024. The juror of the show was Myszka Lewis, who is a curator at Tandem Press, whose taste I respect. And my guest today is one of those 5 artists from the 5x5 show. His name is Briar Craig. Not Brian, but Briar. He is a professor at the University of British Columbia in Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada, which is a sister campus to the University of British Columbia's campus in Vancouver. But he's out in the middle of the desert, apparently, which has an effect on his work and what they offer at the school. He's funny. When I listen back when I'm editing these things, it's pretty rare that I burst out laughing. I burst out laughing 3 times editing this episode. He's very funny. He loves plays on word. His work has to do with text and words and incongruous meanings. And he's just got a really great take on it. We also talk about this crazy thing called UV ink. When you print screen print with UV ink, it's a very bizarre thing. It's light that makes the ink dry immediately, but there's all kinds of ins and outs and weirdnesses about it. So stay tuned and listen to that part. I thought it was fascinating. All right, let's see. Housekeeping. I identify as a cis het white woman and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images that Briar and I talk about will be over on the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. Also over there, you can hit the support and donate button for me and help me keep the lights on. It's just me doing this. And if you value the content that I'm producing, consider becoming a monthly supporter. That would really help us out. All right, I think that's it. Let's get rolling. Briar, it's great to see you. Thanks for coming on Platemark today.
No, thanks for having me. This is great.
Sure. My first order of business is to have you introduce yourself for the listeners.
Okay, my name is Briar Craig. I'm a printmaker and visual arts professor at the University of British Columbia in Kelowna, BC, Canada. I primarily make screen prints, but I do all kinds of things. I teach here 5 different media areas, from letterpress to stone lithography, zinc plate etching, all kinds of relief printing, and then ultraviolet screen printing, which is not as cool as it sounds, but it does do interesting things here in a very arid, semi-arid desert area.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm going to ask you about the UV thing, because I did see a short video of you from overhead, which was great, that you did about UV inks and everything. And I was like, what the hell? I got to ask him about that. So we'll get to that.
Okay.
But first, let's address your name. I kept thinking it must be Brian, but it's not.
Yeah. It is not. It is Briar. It's maybe the nerdiest name on the planet, I think. But I was given the name Briar. My mother, when she was a little girl in Jackson's Point, Ontario, near where I grew up, knew a fellow named Briar Thompson. And he was an older person, like he was in his 20s, and she was like a kid, and she had a total crush on Briar Thompson. Unfortunately, Briar Thompson was killed in the Second World War. And she then vowed that she would use that name if she had a male child. Briar Thompson was named after the thistle, the briar patch, which was prevalent on the Briar's golf course where my grandfather was an assistant golf pro.
Oh.
It's a very convoluted process. I was for a while a member of the Briar's golf course, and they could never remember my name, which just seemed bizarre to me. What? It's Brian? It's Brian? No, it's Briar. It's the name of the golf course. Oh, I don't get that. What's it? How do you pronounce that?
I think you are the first Briar I have ever met.
Well, it now seems to be, and I think there's a Disney princess named Briar.
There is, yes, Briar Rose.
And so it seems now it's much more of a girl's name. And I do, when colleagues and things have children, they often are like, why are you named after a girl? I wasn't.
It's one of those clever androgynous names.
Yeah. It was the bane of my existence growing up, though, because, of course, nobody ever got it right. So sure. It was. Although, interestingly enough, I grew up in Toronto, in Ontario, And about 3 blocks from me, there was another person a year older than me named Briar Craig.
What?
And we only discovered this years later. He has a construction company. And I saw the construction company truck drive past me when I was on my way to the airport one time. And my mom ran into the guy on the street. And we literally grew up 3 blocks from each other, never heard of each other.
That's insane.
We went to different schools, though. Did go to different schools.
Well, still.
It's bizarre, yeah.
That is bizarre. There is now actually an Ann Shafer at the Baltimore Museum of Art in the conservation department, spelled a little different. I was like, wait a minute, I need to be the only Ann Shafer.
Well, I feel like I'm probably the only Briar Craig printmaker.
Probably.
I'm pretty confident that probably is the case.
Do you know when it was that you first knew you were going to be an artist?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, obviously, growing up, I was always interested in drawing, and I think I was, in that era and in that level in school, if you could draw something realistically, you were immediately considered an artist. And it was an interest of mine, and it was something I figured I would do all my life, but I didn't really think I would go and study it and then become an artist. I thought I would just do it as a hobby because I really wanted to be a veterinarian. And in grade 11, I realized I hated science. Just hated it. And I figured being a veterinarian was probably not the best way to go with hatred for science. So when it came time to think about university, I was thinking, well, what do I like to do? And my parents were incredibly supportive that my sister and I could study anything we wanted as long as it was something that we thought would sustain us the rest of our lives. Not as a career necessarily, but mentally and emotionally. And fine art just made sense. So I applied to a bunch of schools, got in, and off I went to study a BFA.
But it's kind of ironic that you landed in the printmaking end of the art world because speaking of chemistry.
Yeah, it is. I think maybe there was enough of an interest in science that it's still satisfying, but it's only enough to satisfy me, and it's not too much to overwhelm me.
Okay.
And I have to say that in terms of my very first module that I ever took at university was taught by a printmaker, but it was a drawing module, and I thought he was the quirkiest, weirdest, most charismatic person I'd ever met. His name is Carl Haywood. He passed away about a year and a half ago. And I thought, well, if you're a printmaker and you can draw this well, I think I want to be a printmaker. And literally that naively, I decided that even though I couldn't take printmaking for another year or so, that was my trajectory. I was convinced I was going to be a printmaker just because Carl Haywood was kind of quirky.
Wow.
And sure enough, when I did try it for the first time, there was things about it that just made sense. And it didn't ever feel completely baffling. I still continue to find the act of painting quite baffling. I'm not sure what it is about applying pigment to canvas directly that I find somewhat intimidating maybe, or whatever. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but printmaking and that step-by-step kind of breaking down of a process over a period of time and things made total sense to me immediately.
Huh. That's interesting. I mean, baffling is not, I've heard the intimidation piece. Absolutely. Baffling. That's a funny word.
Well, it's maybe because I'm not looking at a blank piece of paper when I'm starting to make a print. And I think maybe looking at that blank canvas was the thing that was, I suddenly,
I mean, you have to approach a blank piece of paper with your pencil or your pens or whatever, and a print with the same kind of, what am I going to do? This is my plan, right?
Yeah, I think mostly the work that I've been evolving towards is a little more based on finding things and then using those things as the basis for the work. I think I'm probably a better editor than I'm a creator. So I gather things together and then try to deploy them in ways that I find creative or interesting, or that creates a spark where they play off of one another and start creating new narratives. And I don't have to create those things. In fact, when I do try to create them, I think it's far less successful than when I find them. So I think my creative process is more being an editor and bringing things together that could potentially play off of one another in an interesting way.
So the work is really text-based for the most part. It looks like there's a lot of chance, or like I saw you talking about the guide words at the top of the page of the dictionary and pairing those as sort of non sequitur words. Yeah. Is it ever your writing that you're doing, or is it really literally I'm finding a word here and pairing it with another one?
A little bit of both. I think sometimes I sit down to write because I have a word that I want to play with, and then I go through dictionaries and I start trying to find those accidental couplings in a way that makes that word somehow more interesting or shifts its attention to something new. I think I'm very influenced by the Dada movement and the Dada poets, who, I'm sure you know this, but the definition of a Dada poet was to take an article from a newspaper, roughly the length of the poem you want to create, cut out all the individual letters, put them in a bag, pull them out, write them down in that new order, and hopefully something interesting happens. And I think that's been one of the things that I've done for many, many years. And that thing about the dictionary was, as a kid, I just didn't understand the navigational aid at the top of a page. And I'd collected all these unusual combinations that felt like they were telling me something, but I didn't understand what they were. I won't tell you at what age I figured out that it was a navigational aid. It was probably much too late for me to be thinking that way. But I had this collection of these things, and all these words and word combinations that I've always just liked. And quite often, as I'm walking to the truck, I'm just reciting word combinations that I find kind of playful, or that do something, and that just makes me spin off into other directions and that. So I think it's a little bit of both. I do try to create things at times by putting things together, but often it is more exciting to me when I discover that awkward or unusual combination, and it catches my breath in some point in the day.
When you were collecting the navigational words from the dictionaries, were you cutting them out of the pages, or were you keeping a journal?
Yeah, just writing them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I got so many sketchbooks and journals that I couldn't even begin to find where the first ones were that I wrote down, because they go back to when I was probably 8.
Oh, and you have them all still?
Yeah, somewhere.
All right. Someday there's going to be an archive of Briar's.
Yeah, well, that'd be nice.
It would be nice. Hear you.
Of course, I won't have any memory of it at all, because I'll have lost my marbles already.
It's funny because the subject of the sketchbook has come up a couple of times when I've been speaking with artists like yourself. And one of the first was with a fellow Toronto artist, Emma Nishimura. And she said that her sketchbooks were full of writing that was explaining ideas about the work, and it was never drawings, and she felt like she was doing something wrong.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. My sketchbooks now are mostly just writing. They don't contain a lot of imagery. They used to. I think I tried to work out thumbnail sketches for things, and then realized that if I'm putting together some kind of collage that I'll just put on the scanner and scan as the basis for an image, I'd rather do that and see on the screen what things look like once they've been scanned, and look for the accidents and the subtle things that don't quite align properly, but now somehow feel playful together, or feel maybe awkward together. That if that's maybe the text that I'm thinking about using to supplement that feeling of awkwardness.
Right. I felt like I saw some of your works where the words were close enough together that they ran and split funny on the breaks, on the line breaks and stuff. And somebody was not able to ever parse together what the word.
Yeah. I have a colleague that bought one of my prints. It's a very tiny little print, and in it says, "There is nothing you can't do." But by taking the spaces between the words out and ending each line not at the end of a word, it unfortunately reads, "The rye snot high" is the first words. And my colleague bought this print to give to his wife for a Valentine's present, thinking, "There's nothing you can't do." What a wonderful sentiment to give to your loved one. And she can only read "The rye snot high" and is quite offended that this would be a Valentine's present. And to this day, whenever I see her, she's still like, "I still can't read that damn print." So yeah, but that is, I think, for me, the kind of playfulness that I can bring to the reuse of words. Often those things, like "There is nothing you can't do," literally was a fortune cookie fortune that I collected. And I often turn fortune cookie fortunes into questions as opposed to statements. That one, "There is nothing you can't do," doesn't do that. But as soon as you make it more difficult for someone to read, then the text, once they read it, I think means a little more. It feels like they've had to struggle through it, whereas we, rip open a fortune cookie and read that thing and laugh and throw it on the table and never think about it again. And I think those things are kind of interesting things to think about and maybe to struggle with a little bit. And hopefully in the midst of all that, there will be new unusual words that come up where you can't read it, or you have a new meaning that starts coming. I mean, the rye snot high, maybe not the best meaning in the world, but the fact that it did do that for somebody is part of the goal,
Yeah.
I think.
But the thing I like about the whole concept, and why I think the conceptual circle is pretty tight, is not to denigrate anybody who draws representationally, but the fact that you're juxtaposing words, or, I mean, it's like it takes people out of the sort of visual artness of it and into ideas and into culture and into how you know, I feel like it's more expansive in a way.
I hope so. I think that if that is the case, it happened on it accidentally. I think I've always been a channel surfer. My partner hates when we watch TV together because I get halfway through something and I just want to click to the next thing to hopefully create those weird juxtapositions. You know, Captain Kirk is saying something and then you click to a Downey commercial. And sometimes that creates something really interesting. And even just the text, if you think about what the half sentence that Captain Kirk was saying and the first sentence or the partial sentence of the Downey commercial, sometimes they blend together and say something really new and wacky. And again, it's such a great discovery when it is interesting. But I think I've just sort of stumbled onto that way of working, and it feels like it's about ideas and pushing ideas forward. And I think it is, but
Right.
It wasn't at first.
Right. But it also, I mean, when I'm switching a channel, well, no, who switches channels anymore, right? Like I'm going to Netflix or whatever, but back in the day, kids, and we all used to watch TV and channel surf, I was never listening to the bleed over from one to the next. Like that's a special kind of brain.
Oh, well, I'm not going to lay claim to a special kind of brain. It may be maybe a demented kind of brain. I don't really, I think probably the channel surfing might have started with just the flash of different things. And sometimes the images do conjure up words that I will invent then because it's not the text that's interesting to me. Yeah, I think it has evolved into the words and meaning, and mostly because I really like the shape of letters.
Oh.
I have gradually gotten into letterpress in part because I just love those lead or wood type pieces because I really like the shape of letters. I find them infinitely fascinating. And the fact that there's so many variations and that those variations suggest different moods or different tones. And so I think that interest in the shape of the letter and words came together when I started thinking about words as subject matter.
Did you study graphic design along the way?
No.
Huh.
No. I wish I had. If I had to do it again, I might actually not be an artist. I don't know what I'd be. Maybe an architect, or maybe like a font designer or something like that would be great fun.
Or like a book cover designer or something.
Well, I have done, and I do that sometimes. My partner's a poet, and we have designed a bunch of book covers and hand printed a bunch of slip covers for books, and that's great fun to do. And I think it really does rely on just the logic of how you want to see information on a rectangular surface. So I don't know that I've suffered too much by not having that training, and maybe because I don't really know the ins and outs of how to do it, I stumble into things that are a little different maybe.
I know that graphic designers would say that there's a science to it, but there is sort of ratios and things like that, but it is a lot of gut, you know. I did a little graphic design myself, and I do love letter forms like you. And I remember looking through a letter form book that my mom had when I was a little kid and just poring over the various typefaces and stuff. But I think that you probably have it. You could probably do it without even thinking about it.
Okay. I would hope so.
Trust me.
It is just fun. I think it is a nice, anything that I do, it feels like it's a collage of some kind. You're just playing with pieces and moving around until they feel right, or until they feel appropriately irksome to one another, depending on what it is I might be saying or talking about.
I'm interested in this idea that things need to be discordant or irksome to each other. Is that just to like a hook?
I don't know if I'd say it's a hook. I mean, I think it ultimately would be if you're finding things that do something that sparks some kind of interest. But I think I'm looking for, I call them collisions, where two things come together that wouldn't be together. And that might not necessarily make something that's overly aggressive or aggressively discordant, but there is something this is new. This doesn't flow in a way that we would expect. And that, to me, feels more exciting. Like one of my very first prints where I used that navigational tool idea, the two words were utopian vacuum. And to me, that seems like it's saying so much. I have no clue specifically what it is, but it feels really good. And those two words don't feel like they fit together at all.
Right.
But they do something.
But they do for sure. I mean, it's, there's a vacuum of utopia in our lives at the moment.
I feel like people think that I'm communicating something very clear, and it's really not intended to be, from my perspective anyway, to be very clear. Hopefully enough to spark interest in the viewer to inject or invest their own experiences into how they interpret things.
Right, sure.
That'd be the hope.
So one could do the kind of work you're talking about with discordant ideas and images and words through straight collage.
Yeah.
Why take it farther into screen print?
Good question. I think because I like scale, and straight collage is always going to be small. I'm a big fan of the National Geographic magazine as this fantastic font of stuff. Great images, fantastic headlines, great text, and nice fonts. But I think making something that's always in that size range feels a little bit restrictive somehow, and translating something into a much larger scale. And I think you said you watched the video from overhead of me making that print, which was, I think the title of that print is Whitewash Privilege, also a play of words. There's a name for it, but it's two words together, then a third word that fits with the second word.
Oh, I don't know what that's called.
I literally just heard it on CBC this weekend. So I was talking about this, and I thought, oh, there's a name for that. I didn't know that, but I have.
I'll look it up.
I was half asleep when I was listening to it. So I think translating things and making them larger, also exaggerating the dog-eared corners of an old magazine picture and things like that, is one of my hooks. I use almost exclusively things that have a tactile or the evidence of use on them, because I think we are tactile beings. And while I'm not making a real thing that you could touch, I want to lure people in by the memory of having touched something that looks like that. I'm not really interested in the trompe l'oeil. I'm not trying to fool anybody into thinking that this is the real thing or this is an actual thing. But I think I want to lure people in with the notion that I know what that feels like, and as a hook to getting them interested in the imagery. So if they don't like the words, if they don't find the words captivating at all, there is still something to hold their attention, for at least a little bit.
I feel like there's, in that the images seem to have a border, some of them, a border of the magazine cover, that it's centering them in a way that's even elevating the meaning more, or the focus more in a way which it can butt up against the meaning of the words, the gibberish or the non. I don't even know
and of course the covers themselves, especially the list of different article names down the spine. I'm leaving that stuff in as much as I can, because I'm hoping that in weird ways, those words on the spine that are talking about the content of that particular issue will then also be an added thing to play off the words that I'm adding to the surface of the cover. But I mean, National Geographic is such a ubiquitous thing. I mean, it has this bizarre authority. So I think initially using that as the surface on which I would put my words was trying to lend them some credibility, so that they didn't seem like frivolous or accidental, even though they might be, giving them some sort of weight that I think National Geographic carries with it. No matter what, I mean, I realize all magazines come into their controversies. And I remember when I taught for 4 years in Minnesota, and when I was there, it was a big thing about National Geographic. They rearranged the positioning of the Great Pyramids in a photo, and it was the first time that digital manipulation could have really happened, and they just trying to make the composition tighter, but people went berserk. So I understand all magazines have a controversy that comes with them that their authority might be fueling. But for me, it did lend some credibility to the words that I was putting on them. And hopefully that the words are somehow embedded visually into that cover, so that they are dragged along with that authority that National Geographic has.
National Geographic does have that kind of recognizability. My husband was traveling last winter and he saw the airplane that National Geographic charters for these very expensive, very high-end travel trips, group trips. And the logo on the side of the plane was the single yellow rectangle. And you knew immediately what it was.
Yeah. That's great.
It was crazy.
And I have to say, I also love the yellow. That it's a Crayola crayon box yellow that's just so terrific. And I'll get back to something I was about to say earlier. I love printing yellow. I don't know why. Yellow, especially within CMYK color separation printing, it's the one that brings everything together. So I really enjoy printing yellow. And when I'm printing the National Geographic magazine images, I print 4 or 5 or 6 layers of yellow to slowly and subtly tweak those colors to make them a little richer, a little more resonant than on the print anyway. So National Geographic satisfies that thing. It provides me with yellow to print. It's great. What I was going to get back to saying earlier was that I think also when you were asking about how or why I would not make collages and go through print, I love to print. That sounds maybe a little bit silly or a little bit lacking academia or something like that. I'm not of authority, but I really love the act of making prints. And it never ceases to amaze me that when I pull a squeegee and lift the screen up, that I'm surprised. Even when I'm printing a large edition, the last one is just as surprising as the first one. And I think that's one of the things, that mechanicalness, that immersion into the process of printing is something that I look forward to doing all the time. I've never gotten tired of doing that, so I keep making art. I think if I was a painter and I got tired of painting, then I'd be kind of lost. The process never ceases to make me happy. So it seems like the right thing to do. So translating the collage into the screen print makes total sense because it also satisfies that just urge that I have to see something evolve and grow in the act of making it.
Sure. No, I think that's legit.
I think a lot of printmakers do, I think, worry about because I think one of the slams against printmaking in the larger art world is often that it's too much rooted in the process. And that in an era where ideas are becoming more and more important in the art world. Not that they weren't ever, but I think that it's increasingly, certainly since conceptual art, I think that printmakers have been rather apologetic about their appreciation of the process or their immersion in the process. And I'm just not at all, because it's the thing. I've been doing it 40 years and I still like doing it.
I had a thought for you about the yellow. One, my understanding, well, maybe not true on zinc, but on copper, I think printing yellow is really difficult because it has a chemical reaction with the metal, right?
It's hard on zinc too. Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. There's certain yellows that oxidize less, and there's some additives you can add to them for zinc. I think it's better on copper. The yellow and white on zinc are just awful. They just turn instantly into soup, and they're not a good color. Not a good color. The weird kind of zinky gray that white becomes, or anything that has white in it. Ooh, it's nasty. Probably something I should learn how to use. Discordant color, maybe.
Oh,
but it's uncontrollable, and the longer you leave it on, the more it oxidizes. So, printing an edition would be really hard, I would think.
Well, that brings me around to the UV inks. So, if it was possible to print an etching zinc plate with a UV ink, would that stop the process?
I don't know. I don't know. I think it's. My understanding is that it's reaction of the oil and the pigment to the surface of the zinc, and that they're just having a really nasty, quick oxidization process. So I don't know whether the UV ink base is basically plastic. I'm not sure if it would react. I don't know if the pigment would.
Okay. All right, so
we have never tried it. It's so totally the wrong consistency. It wouldn't wipe well as a plate,
right.
As something ink of a plate. I don't think we'd have to find some way to thicken it quite a bit.
Right, I believe you. I know you have described this UV ink thing multiple times, and I shouldn't make you do it again. But we've never talked about it on the pod, and I'm so curious about why do it, what happens, and what the heck.
It's again, this former professor of mine, Carl Haywood, often traveled 2/3 of the year, and he taught for 1/3. And when in his travels, he would go and make prints in other places, and he discovered that ultraviolet cured ink was a fairly common thing in industry in Europe. And he happened to be in France, and he was learning how to use this stuff. And for a long time, the ink we used was called Dubuis, and it came from France. So he stumbled onto working in a print shop that had this thing, and he was a screen printer, so he thought, well, I'll just try this ink, and really loved it. It's frightfully expensive, so it isn't something that's caught on here. Plus, it requires an extra press. It's almost like a t-shirt drying oven, but it's an ultraviolet light thing. You put your wet print on one end of the conveyor belt, it goes under the light, comes out the other side dry. For a lot of educational institutions, that just is another piece of equipment that no one can afford. But the ink is also frightfully expensive because it isn't exclusively. There are oil-based ultraviolet inks. We're using a water-based or water cleanup ultraviolet ink to keep the fumes and things down in the studio. When it's the one that's super expensive. So a matte finished water cleanup ultraviolet ink is very rare in the world. We have to bring it in now. They no longer make the kind that comes from France. We have to buy some from England. It's the only place that makes it, and it's expensive, but it's really nice. And when he brought it back to Canada to Queen's University as a method of screen printing, he invited me to come to the studio in the summertime and learn how to use it. And I liked it so much, and it satisfied so many problems that we were having here in the Okanagan Valley that we were lucky enough to be able to bring it here as well. We had a very empathetic department head who said fine to the buying of the press and to subsidizing the cost of the ink for the students a little bit. But here, because it doesn't dry with air, doesn't air dry or evaporate when it's drying, it's fantastic for a really semi-arid desert where it's so dry. Anything water-based or anything solvent-based dries almost instantly. And ink was always just getting clogged up on our screens. This ink doesn't. So we have also gone from, say, 200 mesh screen fabric to 350 mesh screen fabric, or I've printed as high as 600, although it's very hard to push ink through 600 mesh screen. Almost impossible for many students who are just starting out. So we mostly are in the 355 range, which just doubles the amount of detail we can get. And since we don't worry about the detail drying out, we can print much finer imagery.
I see.
Screen printing was always very much an Andy Warhol, large chunks of color, and the photo information would be quite chunky and maybe a little bit coarse. And it doesn't need to be that. It vaulted with the development of UV ink into something that could rival the subtlety that litho or etching could create. And I always felt that screen printing was lacking that thing. So that's a really long and involved and very rather exciting answer. I get kind of jazzed about it.
I can see why. Because when you were talking about it, I'm like, it gets better, finer detail. I'm like, what? Why? How? But I'm still confused about this drying thing. Like, how can it not air dry ever?
It will get sticky over time.
Okay.
But it never will fully dry. And the way it was explained to me was that molecularly, this ink is like a bunch of ping pong balls all just rubbing together. And the ping pong ball, the outer casing on the ping pong ball is what protects the ink from drying. When it goes through a UV lamp with a very specific wavelength of ultraviolet light and a massive dose of it, the outside casings of the ping pong ball break, and instantly the ink is dry. And it's instant. I mean, I've printed as many as 20 layers in a day on the same print. And that's just unheard of for a lot of air dry inks because every new layer of ink will likely make the old layers of ink wet again. So you're now waiting for 5 layers of ink to dry before you can print the next one. And but here in the Okanagan, it's just so dry that air dry inks we were having horrible problems with them. And of course, we were using solvent-based ink for a long time because we could thin that down differently and extend the drying time more than a water-based ink. So moving to the UV and the water-cured or the water-soluble UV ink was a huge. We could use the leverage of health and safety to move to that thing.
Okay.
To sort of pressure the university a little bit.
But it's so mind-boggling. It's just like, what the hell? Who discovered this magic?
Right. Well, I think it has really practical repercussions, especially in industry, because it literally is just instant dry. You never have to have drying racks anywhere. You print, you put it through the machine, it comes out, it's on the stack, it's dry. And the fact that you're not going to lose detail as you're printing because things are drying out, I think created all kinds of options and fineness. As the digital world has come about and digital printing has come about, when it first hit and it was rivaling or purporting to rival photography, the difference between an actual full tonal range photograph and what digital printing could do were incredible. They're not so different anymore because we're always working towards finer and finer detail. And I think that UV ink just allowed screen printing to go to much finer and finer detail. Now, in different environments, in a very moist environment, air dry inks aren't really a huge problem, not the way they are here. So I can also see that a lot of places haven't even experimented with UV because they don't really need to.
Okay.
But our humidity here is pretty much all 8 months of the year is 21%.
Oh,
so it's dry. It's dry.
How are your hands?
Oh, yeah, crusty.
That is amazing that they have, and I assume that industry pushed it forward because of time, the time.
And it's widely used in industry here,
Right.
but largely the solvent-based version of it.
Oh, okay.
So it's something that really I couldn't even begin to bring into a university environment because the health and safety standards of academia just wouldn't really stand for it.
But you keep saying not water-based, but water-soluble. What is the binder?
Well, basically, this ink, these molecular particles are plastic of some kind. Yeah. So really, we're printing with plastic, and it's a funny thing because we often used blockouts on a screen. Once you made your stencil on your screen, you paint or use a water-soluble blockout around the outside if we were using oil-based ink. And then the oil-based ink would be blocked from going through pinholes or the crap that happens around outside the image area. Initially, Carl Haywood was saying we can't use water-soluble blockout anymore because, of course, this ink is water-based. And one time when I was using it, I inadvertently used water-soluble blockout and nothing happened.
Oh.
And it occurred to me, well, it's not that it's water-based, it's water cleanup. So I don't know. Again, maybe that's too much chemistry for me to try to figure out why that is what it is. But I just know that it isn't water-based.
The other thing that you talked about in the video about the UV inks was this idea of transparency.
Yeah, it's all UV ink. Well, certainly the UV ink we use. I think in industry there are opaque UV inks now. But the deal with the ink that we use is that the ultraviolet light has to penetrate the entire deposit of ink. So even if it's microscopically thin, if it was opaque, only the skin on the surface would dry, and it would leave wet ink underneath. The white ultraviolet light has to be able to penetrate all the way through to the bottom of the deposit and dry it from the bottom up. So we are automatically forced to always be working with transparency, so nothing is ever opaque, unlike a lot of more conventional screen printing. But I had always been working towards using only transparent base and suspending lithopigments into that because they were more vibrant. So it didn't really change my orientation to screen printing, which was already about transparency. It does change people that learn how to screen print using UV ink, then go off somewhere else and try to use inks, and suddenly they can create opacity, which we just can't do here. And it changes things for sure. But I love the coherence of color when the white of the paper is always shining through all of them. Even when they get stacked up and on top of each other, the white of the paper is still contributing to the luminosity of that pigment.
So it's visible to the eye.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think it is. And I think conventional screen printing poster inks always had a fairly chalky or almost pasty sort of look to them, and these just don't at all because there is. It's almost like the difference between seeing a color photograph and an old color slide. The color in the color slide always seemed really luminous because it was light coming through it, as opposed to just light bouncing off of it. And I think that's a contributing factor, and I just really like that luminous quality.
Huh.
So I'm making all my students learn it too.
How many students are in your in the department?
In the department as a whole, I think we have 150 BFA majors, but in the print area, in any given week, there's maybe 50 students altogether.
That's a lot.
spread out through all the different discipline areas.
Right.
So it is a lot. It's our studio space is modest, to say the least. So when we get 50 people using 5 different media areas every week, it can be chaos, and especially around deadline time.
Sure. What's the first assignment you give to your printmaking students when they first start?
Quite often it depends. It depends on the media, but quite often it's really just, let's just play and just try something out. Often drawing based, so that we can learn. We're using skill sets that we already have, and we're not relying on too much technology yet. We're not relying on scanners and computers and things like that to create photo film positives. But often it really is just a prompt. I say you've got 4 options. One's cafe, one's lunch, one is dog, and one is fog. And you just have to choose something that fits in those categories. And because I don't really care what they do, I want them to be interested in what they're doing. In terms of subject matter, more of those things I think lend themselves to maybe unconventional drawing techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Drawing fog is pretty hard,
Mm-hmm.
so you have to invent a way to do that, and that's the goal anyway.
Fog. That's better than like the shelf of white objects.
Maybe just a little bit, but the shelf of white object in fog would be amazing. New assignment for next year.
Some of my guests have revealed one was in an etching class at Kansas State. My friend Jason Shula always assigns them take one of Goya's caprichos and twist it.
Right.
Yeah. And so the collection of capriccio-esque things that he has from all his students are really amazing. And he's also the one who's working on the electrolytic etching process.
Right.
Yeah. And so the lines are super fine. They're really fantastic. And they're really getting there with the aquatints. And the other one was Phil Sanders said that he puts up his print of some plate that he has made. And he says that to them, over the course of the semester, you have to print this and match mine. And so he'll do a really realistic one and a abstract something and a whatever else. And the learning process of trying to actually get it to do what the other guy's thing did has been very informative for them, apparently.
Yeah. Well, that especially when you're getting into things like wiping an etching plate, there's so many. I mean, you just sneeze once while you're wiping, you've over wiped an area. You use one extra piece of paper to wipe, and it's over wiped, or one less and it's under wiped. So that's a big challenge, and one of those things I think trying to get students to think that everything's an exercise is really important early on in discovering printmaking, so that they're not expecting that they're going to be making these amazing things. They're learning a process, and that's a huge learning curve and a really steep uphill walk. But when we have the expectation that we have to be making something that's going to be saleable or that's going to be the epitome of your artistic practice so far, while learning these things that are really outside the box for most people's prior experience, it just creates a level of pressure that isn't necessary. So fun assignments with interesting subject matter so they can interpret it any way they want, feel like the right way to go to get their interest level into the image, but make it difficult enough technically that they won't have expectations of the outcome.
Right. I think that's the good part and the bad part about stepping into the printmaking world, because you have to spend so much time figuring out how, that the why is delayed, which can be good, but also takes a long time to get there.
Yeah, and within a lot of university programs where students are learning multiple different discipline areas at the same time, and they're in a painting class or a sculpture class, and they have some expectation of the why already, it's difficult to then pull them back in the print studio and say, well, let's just play. Don't worry about it. I know the materials are expensive, and I know the paper's expensive, but let's just play and not worry about it and see what happens. And then we'll figure out from there how to make it better.
Right.
But that's one of the challenges, I think, in part because most students don't come in to a university with a lot of printmaking experience. They may have printed T-shirts in high school or maybe a lino cut, but pretty rare for a high school student to have done any litho or any etching in a significant way.
Right. No, I agree.
It's that, but that's good and bad too, because then the learning curve is much steeper, and that generates a lot more excitement, I think, if you can get everyone to come in and work. But the community is so much more interesting because everyone's in there. They have to work in that space. They can't take it home and do a lithograph. It's just not possible.
No.
So I think that's one of the benefits, is the community is pretty great and tight.
Does the school offer an MFA?
They do. We have an MFA now. One of our the drawbacks to our program is our studio is rather small, so MFA students have to work around undergraduate times, which doesn't necessarily make a lot of MFA students want to come here and study printmaking, which is too bad. But we do have an MFA program. It's quite small. The University of British Columbia is one of the only universities in Canada that is trying to do the University of California or the state university thing where there's multiple campuses. There's a campus in Vancouver, and then we are the second campus in Kelowna, which is quite on the interior of British Columbia instead of on the coast. So we are UBC, and UBC also has a printmaking program in Vancouver. So it's and a grad program there too, but I don't know they get a lot of graduate printmakers.
I keep thinking back to this idea of the National Geographic yellow and other sort of iconic yellows that you might find because you're a fan of yellow.
I am.
A friend of mine runs a print shop in Rockville, Maryland, Lily Press. Her name's Susan Goldman, and she has worked for a long time with many amazing artists, one of whom was Sam Gilliam. And he did a series of screen prints with her that were very minimal, horizontal format of just squares. And each of the squares was a slightly different yellow. And each of them, there's a set of, 6 or 8 of them. And the squares, are big. They're 12 by 12 or something. Each of the yellows reflects a different kind of school bus.
Oh, okay.
Which, I don't know if you guys have school buses up there. They don't have school buses in Europe. I had a French friend who was like, oh my God, I just saw a school bus. It was freaking out because they don't have them.
Once again, it's that terrific, slightly orangey yellow.
Yeah.
It just makes me kind of salivate a little bit.
Right, right. But then also, this sort of minimal square is kind of like, okay. But then we start thinking about school buses and busing and segregation, and it just goes on and on and on. It's like, oh, those are great.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at how much support the basic formal things can lend towards an idea, and I don't know if it's exclusive to our school or if it's even really an issue, and it's something that I'm just inventing in my own head. But I think we sometimes emphasize the conceptual so much that we de-emphasize the visual, and I think they kind of need to be 50-50. I think the visual's got to support the idea, and the idea's got to support the visual, and because there's a whole whack of conceptual work that I think are really terrific ideas, and it's a wonderful thing to read on the wall of a gallery or read in a book. But then when I see the outcome, I'm completely disinterested in it, or I don't see the connection. And I think there needs to be some sort of connection. And when a color can suggest so many spin-off ideas in people's heads, that feels like it's using the formal side of art making to help tell the story or to help push the narrative forward or dig into an idea. And I think we don't always do that as much as we could.
Well, I think you're right. In this case, it's, how reductive can you be and still convey the story?
Yeah.
Just so spare.
That sounds like the name of a new book, Reductive with Yellow.
There you go.
Or a T-shirt. That's one of the great things about screen printing is you can make T-shirts, and I have way too many. Because Reductive with Yellow. I want to see that on a shirt.
Did you make your hat?
I did. Yes, I did. It's the tattoo. It's the text tattoo I would have if I had guts enough to have a text tattoo.
For the listeners who are not watching this, it says no regrets.
Yeah. And I have none. Well, none about the hat anyway. I have lots of other regrets, but no regrets about the hat. But yeah, I make hats all the time. Again, it's another little walking billboard opportunity to play with text, and they typically are misused words or misspelled things or mad gabs. My favorite mad gab for my hat is relief honey. And when you say it quickly, relief honey, it's really funny. But it's amazing how many people come up to me on the street and go, what's your hat talking about? Is that a company? Nope. Say it fast. And they can say it. They'll say relief honey. And they'll say, I'm hearing really funny, but they're saying relief honey, and they're not making the connection because they're still focused on the words. And I find that quite amusing.
It is amusing because I didn't get it till you said it. Oh,
but then also because people have wondered if that's a business, like a honey making business or something, an apiary of some kind.
really funny.
It made me think that I've got a whole series of hats that are the most reductive things possible. So instead of wearing like a Rolling Stones hat, I have a hat that says band. Instead of wearing a Nike hat, I have a hat that says shoe. And of course, they are not that thing. It's that this is ne pas un pipe, that Rene Magritte thing. This is not a pipe. It clearly is not a shoe, but it is, in my mind anyway, quite a funny joke.
You're really a surrealist Dada person. That's funny. I like it. So are your works for sale through your own website, or do you have a gallery that people can go to?
I don't have a gallery. People could contact me through my website. I don't really put prices and things on my website. Never been terribly pushed towards selling things, mostly because I teach at the university and I get paid, rather comfortable amount of money to keep making art. And that's part of my job, is I have to keep doing that. So I've never really felt the need to approach galleries. And I think I did approach quite a few years ago, and felt some resistance to works on paper and to the print in general as this multiple original that the gallerists couldn't wrap their heads around. So I just sort of stopped worrying about it. And as I get closer to retirement, I'm a little more aware that maybe I need to start selling some of the stuff that's in the basement. But I've never had to really do that. But yes, people have contacted me through my website, and we've negotiated prices and sales.
Have you ever published with a print shop?
I never have, no. It still seems like it would be fun to do. Invent something that I can't do on my own and go and do it. I've worked with industry quite a bit, where I needed to print something very, very large. I was trying to I made a whole series of works that would fit into the illuminated signs in bus stops.
Oh.
And I couldn't print them myself, technically. I just don't have the facilities to print that large. They were 4 by 6 feet. So I've worked with industry a number of times to have people print for me, but not really in that master printer kind of relationship. I would just come in and say, this is what I need, and they would make it for me. And I've done some neon too, which is really great fun to make. And of course, I can't do neon, certainly at the scale that I was trying to do it at. So there's a company not very far from here where they make neon, and they've been terrific. I just show up with ideas, and they seem quite enthused by doing this thing that's out of the box for them.
There aren't that many neon providers, are there?
They're not. I think there are more than we think there are.
Maybe.
This one it's a 2-hour drive away from where I live, and it's in a small little town, and they just make neon and other kinds of signage. It's almost like it's a screen printing business and a sign making business and a T-shirt making business, and we do neon too.
Oh, and by the way.
And it's surprisingly not as expensive as I thought it was going to be.
Really?
But it's so fragile that once you get it, it's this thing like, oh my God, what do I do with this now?
Right. That's fun. I would love to make a neon sign. I don't know what, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. When of course the neon lends itself to text so nicely that I've been playing with it that way. My 2 favorite ones that I can think of right now is one says, "There's nothing you can't do," but the T and the apostrophe in "can't" flicker on and off. So it's either saying there's nothing you can do or nothing you can't do. The other one is more lies ahead, which I think is also one of those dualities that we politically know there are more lies coming our way, but more lies ahead seems kind of optimistic.
Huh.
I like those things where you can bring your own sensibility to. I'd say it's great fun to do, and the first time you see it illuminated, it's pretty exciting. It's almost as good as lifting the screen up.
Yeah, I think that universally printmakers talk about the reveal and how that's the easiest sales tool ever for getting people interested in prints.
Yeah. It and I think people also really like coming to the studio and see all this heavy equipment. It's just so outside of our normal daily experience that it's elevating somehow. It makes us seem so kind of way more important than we probably are. We can do this. We can control this. And I think people should just try printmaking. It's great fun. It never stops being fun to me, anyway. And I like that. I like that sense of collaboration. Obviously, I mentioned the the community that happens in the print studio where everyone's working together and maybe not so much collaborating, but being in the presence of other people making and other people doing other things. But I really love that collaboration with this medium that I've always referred to my use of medium as working with a slightly evil collaborator that will take the thing that I'm trying to do and so totally screw it up sometimes that it's surprisingly something new. And when that happens and it's good, I mean, it's always heartbreaking when that happens, but if I can calm down and pause a little bit, take a couple breaths, look at it and think, oh, is it actually that bad? Or is this something kind of cool? I quite like that collaboration.
Right. I think printmaking attracts people who are interested in people more so than the painter types.
Well, yeah, and that is something too. We talk a lot about that sort of thing with students. And it dissuades a lot of students from taking printmaking because they think, well, I'm not going to be able to do this once I leave school. Now, I personally think that's the reason to do it. If this is your only chance, this is what you should be doing. The print co-op and the continued need for that kind of community is, I think, a real benefit to it. But people don't think about that. They're in a lot of mindsets, I think, certainly for early BFA students, is that I will have my own studio in the garret of my parents' house or in the garret of my apartment and just be working in isolation, and won't that be amazing? And yeah, part of me thinks that when I have the studio in the summer at the university to myself, it's quite amazing, and it's good for maybe 3 weeks, and then I start missing people being around and those offhanded conversations that take me off in new directions, and I think we really benefit from that kind of connection with one another.
Right. Well, and being faculty also, I mean, you're clearly a people person.
Strangely, probably not.
Oh.
I think there's a persona that I get to put on every day. Left on my own, I'm quite a shy and retiring person that doesn't really like talking. And if I go to openings, I'm at the back and I'm walking around, and people talk to me, and I kind of run away. But they don't pay me for that, so
That's right. I mean, do you feel like a whole other person steps on stage when class starts?
Sometimes, yeah. It really is outside my nature. I think people that know me well understand that it's something that's not. It's gotten easier to do over the years. I think I've worked out who this person is that's a little more outgoing. But there's a part of me that still would like to be working in isolation in the studio by myself. But I also know that I can't do that anymore.
Right.
That's a weirdly romantic idea, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. All right. We've talked for an hour. If you can believe it, how fast an hour can go.
It does go fast, yeah.
This
has been quite fun.
Yeah, good. Briar, it's been wonderful talking to you today. I love getting I love getting professors' takes on the classroom, and I feel like you guys you're like this kind of squeeze point conduit that is so critical to the ecosystem. Like you're grabbing the young minds and you're scooching them out through the sausage maker, and I think it's a critical role.
Hopefully in a good way.
Well, yes, no.
We haven't got the bad Play-Doh mold thing that squirts everyone out that looks like stars or something. Unicorns.
Yeah. But it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for doing it.
It's been a pleasure talking to you too. Thank you very much for all your thoughts and questions.
Oh, you are very welcome. Thank you for listening to this episode of Platemark with Briar Craig, part of a mini-series that I'm doing with 5 artists who were selected to be in the 5x5 show, part of PrintAustin this year in 2024, juried by Myszka Lewis, who is one of the curators at Tandem Press. I hope you enjoyed it. He's a delight to talk to. As I said at the top, laughed out loud several times as I was editing it, because he's funny, which I appreciate. Let's see. Oh, right. So several thank yous that need to go out. One to Briar, obviously, for being a wonderful guest. And one also to Dan Fury of Extension Audio for doing first pass at sound and editing. One to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music. And one also to Skip Barnhart and Lee Turner for handing over soundscapes from their studios for the entry. Images are over on the show notes. You know this at platemarkpodcast.com. Also, hit the support and donate button and become a monthly supporter. It's just me doing this, and your support would really help me out. Help me keep the lights on, as they say. All right, I think that's it. We'll see you next time.